Okay. So we have Gordon Chang here. Gordon Chang is a renowned American lawyer, political commentator, and we can see him on Fox News. Graduated from Cornell Law School, lived in China, mainland China, and in Hong Kong for over 20 years. And I think you are the most well-known expert regarding China in America. Am I wrong here?
I'm not sure about that, but nonetheless, it's very kind of you to say that. So
Oh,
thank you.
uh-huh. A long time no see, sir. The last time we talked, I think it was 3 years ago at a CPAC event in Washington, D.C. Um, First, I wanted to ask you that 3 years ago, you said that United States should decouple from China, that we should have no trade relationship, what kind of relationship whatsoever. Do you still believe that? And do you think Trump would gear his second admin towards that way?
I believe we need to sever relations with China. And the reason is that China uses every point of contact to take down our society. And right now, Michael, we are being overwhelmed. And until we can figure this relation out, we need to sever those contacts. But we also got to remember that China's regime has declared a people's war on us. And although we Americans think that's just propaganda, it's important because that phrase has resonance for the Communist Party. It means total war. They are actually acting upon that. And they believe that the Communist Party will never be secure as long as the United States exists. So we have to understand the existential nature of this struggle. Right now, we don't. We're a society that thinks we're at peace, but China talks about going to war all the time. They have seated their operatives in place in our country, and we are extremely vulnerable. What President Trump will do, I mean, I just don't know. The point is, though, that he does have a different view of China than his predecessor. And I hope that he acts upon this in ways which will be meaningful to protect us.
Mhm. I can see President Trump giving a shout out on you. I love Gordon Chang. Didn't he say that a couple of times throughout his rallies? I saw it.
Yes, I've been very fortunate that he said that, especially 2 years ago at CPAC. But he has said it on some interviews, TV interviews, and I've heard people say that he's also mentioned it at rallies.
Hmm. Which means that he loved your point of view of China, I would assume.
I hope so. It is when you're president of the United States, you have a lot of pressures, got a lot
Hmm.
of people talking to you. And there's always a lot of pressure on a new president, even if someone's been president before, to try to reestablish good quote unquote relations with China. So every American president is subject to that, wanting to do better than his predecessor. And that unfortunately means that we waste more time talking to the Chinese. Because as we talk to China, it continues unacceptable and dangerous conduct. And it puts us deeper into a hole.
Hmm. Let's talk about the political turmoil that is going on in Republic of Korea, South Korea. Uh, President Yoon facing impeachment. Constitutional Court will have the final say regarding that. Many people are worried about it because Constitutional Court, some people have been saying that the left took over like already 6 seats of it, at least 6 to 7 seats, that there's a high possibility. Now I'm talking about really even conservative people t telling me, that actually in private they are kind of worried about it. But if you look at the protesting scene, what I've been heard was you have 3 to 5 times more people coming out in support of President Yoon compared to the protest for impeachment of President Yoon. What's your thought on that?
Yes, well, clearly the South Korean people have sided with Yoon in this, and especially younger South Koreans, which is really interesting. And my guess is that younger South Koreans see their country as South Korea.
Mhm.
The leftists, the leadership of the leftists, in their 60s, and they are very sort of pro North Korea. And the
Yeah.
reason is that they see their country as Korea. And therefore, they've been trying to abolish the South Korean state by merging it into the North Korean state. This is extremely dangerous, of course. And so I think younger South Koreans understand that although they may not like the declaration of martial law, the point is that Yoon is the only one who will protect the Republic of Korea, and that the leftists will try to get rid of it.
Mhm. So what's your prediction on that? Do you think the people's voice would be heard to the Constitutional Court, or do you think Korea would become, and I think I read your tweet that you said that South Korea is on the brink of becoming covered by communism. Or do you think we are at the brink of danger right now? Do you see it? What's your prediction on that?
Yeah, first of all, I do see the danger because the leftists have been taking over the institutions of democracy and not respecting them. They've been impeaching everybody, not because they've committed crimes or not fulfilled their duties to the Constitution, but because they are conservatives. So this is a purge. This is, I think, the destruction of democratic institutions. And so I'm extremely worried. I wish I were smart enough to make a prediction, but I'm extremely concerned that Yoon will be removed by the Constitutional Court, and then we will have a crisis. Because right now, I see the pro North Korea, pro China, Minju, Democratic Party of
Yeah.
Korea, is going to do all it can to break the alliance with the United States in the South Korean state and make South Korea a vassal of China.
Mhm.
So Moon Jae-in of Minju, when he was president, tried to do all these things. He wasn't able to succeed for a number of reasons, but we also got to remember that the leadership of Minju right now, and especially Lee Jae-myung, is more ruthless and maybe even more radical than Moon. So yes, this is a time of great danger for freedom in South Korea.
Mhm. So Lee Jae-myung, like you said, DPK leader, no, Democratic Party of Korea leader. He's recently been convicted for violating election laws and is also on trial or under investigation for cases involving real estate corruption, bribery of a Supreme Court justice, and sending money to North Korea. They say up to probably $8 million. There's a company named Sangbangul that the president there sent money to North Korea. What do you think about this? Isn't this also probably a bigger issue than the impeachment of President Yoon?
Well, it should be, but Lee is trying to speed up the process
Yeah.
of the removal of Yoon Suk Yeol so that he can be elected president before his convictions can be affirmed, and therefore he would become ineligible. So this is a race to the courthouse in a
Yeah.
sense. But Lee is a very bad actor, and it's not just because he looks like a communist. I mean, I don't know if he is a communist, but if he were, he'd be acting the way that he's acting right now. So, yeah, but apart from that, he is a very bad actor. So this is everything's on the line right now for South Korea. I think a lot of Americans don't realize this,
I,
of
I,
course, because, we're not following events in South Korea as closely as others are. And also, a lot of Americans don't have the background. Like I
yeah.
don't have the background that you would, for instance. So I'm very worried that we have the Biden administration is sending Secretary of State Blinken to South Korea. I think he's going to mouth all sorts of essentially pro-Minju statements, and this could get very bad very quickly.
hmm Do you think because in America the domestic politics are so entertaining, so to speak, every day you have this back and forth between Trump and the anti-Trump, the establishment, the deep state, so to speak, against patriots, that they just don't have enough room to know what's going on. Like South Korea is probably one of the most important allies, but most Americans don't even have a clue what's going on there. I don't think they even know that the impeachment case is going on unless you're interested in uh East Asia?
Yeah, well, for a couple things, we've just gone through a presidential election of our own, and it has always absorbed Americans' attention. And of course, there's more attention because it was Trump on the ballot.
Mhm.
So there was heightened attention. The other thing, though, is that the United States has been domestically focused, but after the election, I think things have calmed down a lot in America. But also got to remember we got the problems of Syria, where the government collapsed, Assad fled to Moscow. We've got all sorts of issues in East Asia other than South Korea. So there's a lot going on right now in the world. And I think that partially explains why there is less attention focused on South Korea at the moment. It's
Mhm.
just the world's afire, and South Korea is only one of the fires.
Do you think there should be like a, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, like even on Fox News, it's very hard to find out what's going on in South Korea or Japan, our allies. And, you and I, we're Asians, so we pay more attention to what's going on there. But sometimes I wonder whether we should have like some kind of like weekly corner. I know that it's not as sexy or entertaining like what's going on here in the States regarding Trump or, what have you. But I feel like, because if people are not interested in the stories, then that means that the establishment can have their say. You know what I'm saying? Like even in
Right.
South Korea.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we Americans, maybe, and certainly more so than people in other countries, are internally focused. And so we only pay attention when things become a crisis.
Mhm.
I mean, we didn't pay attention to Osama bin Laden, even after he killed
Oh,
six
you're right. People
Americans
didn't
in
even know who he was.
1993.
People didn't even know who he was. Yes.
People didn't know who he was. People were completely surprised by 9/11, though they should not have been. So this is just sort of part of the American psyche. The events in South Korea, as you point out, are critically important. If nothing else, we Americans have drawn our Western defense perimeter not off the coast of California or Hawaii or even Guam, but since the 19th century, we've drawn it off the coast of East Asia. And South Korea, at the northern end of that critical perimeter, anchors that line. So it is really important to us. And so, yeah, we should pay much more attention to it. But I'm sure that until something really big happens in South Korea, I fear that we are not devoting the attention to it that it absolutely requires.
When I look at South Korea, it's kind of like America. The left-wing party, like pro-China, pro-North movement was even happening within the entertainment industry. You can see like singers like IU supporting protesters that rallied for impeachment of President Yoon, and also the Democratic Party in Korea. So if you look at United States, Hollywood, big tech, and all, the faculties in these prestigious colleges, not just prestigious colleges, even state colleges, they were heavily leaning towards the Democratic Party, and I think that thing is the same wave as has been going on in South Korea. We just didn't pay attention to it. Do you agree with that point?
Yeah, I do. It, the issue, of course, people frame it as martial law. And a lot of people, including me, didn't like the martial law declaration. But we have to understand something that the issue is no longer martial law. The issue is the security and the continued existence of the South Korean state. And Yoon, for all his faults as a president, is the only hope to maintain an independent and free South Korea. Because people in our country, in the United States, don't understand how malicious the Democratic Party of Korea is, how dangerous it is, how pro North Korea it is, how pro China it is, how anti freedom it is. And so I think the proper framing is not martial law versus no
Mhm.
martial law.
Mhm.
It is South Korea versus North Korea and China.
Mhm. Yoon said he moved to declare martial law after Korea's National Intelligence Service investigated hacking by North Korea and possibly by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, against South Korea's National Election Commission servers and computers discovered serious weaknesses in the system. And, I have been personally told by a lot of the People's Party uh, members in person probably 5 to 6 years ago. They have been always talking about voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud, but it sounded like almost like a conspiracy theory because the mainstream media in Korea, like 조선일보, 중앙일보, or 동아일보, or KBS, MBC, SBS, or these cable news network channels, they never mention about it. What's your thought on that?
Well, I actually looked at the 2020 National Assembly election, and I've talked to people who have done thorough studies and analyses. And it's clear that there was election fraud, and that's almost 100%. But we also know a very high probability that Minju at the time sought technical help from China in order to develop the algorithms to affect the outcomes in that 2020 election. Remember, that election was really strange in the sense you had a 3-day process. You had initial voting, then you had a dark day, no voting, and then a third day. That dark day in the middle gave people who controlled the algorithms enough information to figure out how many votes they needed to change in order to elect Minju National Assemblymen without appearing to be suspicious. But when you look at the voting patterns from 2020, it's clear that there was manipulation of the elections. And a number of people have also looked at other aspects of the election, of security of ballot boxes, for instance, and came away with some very disturbing conclusions about this. So, yes, there was fraud. And you got to remember that people were surprised by how many people Minju elected in that round of voting. So this was, and there is a University of Michigan professor who's done statistical analyses of this, in addition to other people like Grant Newsham. So it is clear that there was voter fraud. And so stop the steal, which is the phrase, is something valid. And we need to have better elections, not only in the United States, but also in South Korea.
So I remember when you first tweeted about on X, when President Yoon declared martial law, it was a critical tone. And I think most people, even on the conservative side, because I can honestly say that President Yoon was not that popular on both sides of the aisle prior to this impeachment situation and the martial law declaration. But when people found out that he was targeting the National Election Commission, which has not been audited for the past 50 plus years, everybody was supporting him immediately. You could see it. All the YouTube comments were heavily supporting him. I consider President Yoon probably the conservative party's superstar right now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, his approval rating has gone from below 20 to about 40%. And what's happened also in the interim after martial law is we see Minju overstepping. It's not only impeached the president, it's impeached the acting president for doing something which was sensible and correct and responsible. So you can see that Minju, after the initial impeachment of President Yoon, has really gone on a rampage, impeaching everybody. And I think that's brought to my attention, certainly brought to my attention. And I think it's brought to other people's attention that Minju is the threat now to democracy. It's not Yoon, it is Minju.
And many South Koreans who are conservatives, they are hoping that President Trump, after he gets inaugurated, that things would change, that he would expose, because I know that President Trump really wants to dig into what happened in 2020, where a lot of people believe that a lot of shenanigans have been happening. I think it has been proven that even the mainstream media, hiding the Hunter Biden laptop story and all these shenanigans, they did rig the election. And I think a lot of Koreans believe that South Korea somehow back then, which was controlled by the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party, that they were involved in the 2020 election rigging in America. I don't know whether you know about this report about that happened on according to the documents, independent journalist Ryan Hartwig, he received a tip about a cargo of fake votes that was taken from plane at Phoenix's Sky Harbor Airport on election night. And on November the 7th, the party set off to expose the plot. No evidence emerged, but the group took footage of a Korean airplane and posted it on Hartwig's website. And this gained a little bit of traction for a while. I remember reading that report on Gateway Pundit, and a lot of Koreans paid attention to that. But then Biden took over, and no further investigation has happened. Do you know about this situation? And do you think South Korea was also somehow involved in the rigging of 2020 American presidential election? And do you think Chinese government was behind all this scheme?
Well, on 2020 in America, couple things. One of them is that I believe that China was involved in election interference in our country. I don't know about ballot rigging, but they certainly were involved in subterfuge, and they were very clearly working for Biden over Trump. In terms of South Korea's interference in Arizona, I don't know. But from people and I don't follow domestic politics, but from people I know who do, they believe that the 2020 results in Arizona were that Arizona was stolen from Trump. So, you put all those things together, Michael. Yeah, it's possible. I don't know, but the point is that Arizona in 2020 was certainly a very suspicious election results.
Because it caught me off guard too, that somehow a Korean airline report, and this was a Trump official who tweeted about it, and it just this story kind of disappeared. But I can tell you that some of the Trump team members have been talking about this recently, regarding, since President Yoon has been talking about voter fraud in South Korea. And nobody expected that, because President Yoon has never talked about voter fraud or election fraud in his entire tenure in his presidency. I mean, so far, he never talked about it. But then when he was targeting the National Election Commission, then that's when people rose up. Because they were all talking about it on YouTube and all these alternative media websites.
Yeah, there's something really wrong with the National Election Commission in South Korea. I mean, it now wants to criminalize any criticism of the commission. I mean, that's the end of democracy. This is just amazing what Minju is trying to do. So, we've got to be on guard, and we Americans have got to understand what's at stake in South Korea. This is democracy versus Minju totalitarianism.
Okay. Do you think President Trump, if he gets inaugurated, that will be a game changer somehow regarding President Yoon situation?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I don't know how Trump is going to view this. The thing is, remember that Trump's got a lot trying to grab his attention in his first days in office. And so I'm not sure that any foreign problem, maybe other than China, is going to, or Ukraine, is going to actually absorb him, because he's going to be pulled in so many different directions. But what we have got to do, or what I'm going to do, is try to make sure the issue of South Korea doesn't go away. And I hope that Trump addresses it. I'm not in a position to go to him and say, you got to do something about this. But I do have an X account, and I do have other ways of trying to bring this to the attention of the American people. And I'll do everything I can, because I believe, as I've said, that this is a critical issue.
Do you see some members who are very familiar with Korean politics that is going in the second admin under Trump?
Well, Rick Grinnell is his Korea emissary, but he's only part-time. And Korea is only part of his part-time job, the other part being Venezuela. So I do worry about that. There are some Korean American Republicans in Congress, at least as one of them. But, I don't know how much she has the ability to get Trump to focus on South Korea. These are things that I don't know. I wish I did, but I'm not part of the transition effort. I'm just outside of it. I'm just somebody with an X account.
Hmm. Senator Bill Haggerty, do you think he knows a lot about East Asia?
Oh yeah, he does. I mean, he was ambassador to Japan,
Yes.
and when you're ambassador to Japan, Korea is a large portion of your portfolio. So yes, I know that he knows a lot about Korea.
So Gordon, like in America's perspective, we would like this strong alliance between United States, Japan, and South Korea. But within South Korea, the Democratic Party, they always play this, in America, they play this race card or what, political identity politics. But in Korea, they always talk about historical animosity between Japan and Korea. They want to talk about comfort women situation, all the bad stuff that so that it riles people's emotions. So how could you as a South Korean be aligned or how could you unite together with Japan? What do you think about these tactics that the Democratic Party of Korea is using?
Yeah, they're extremely irresponsible. I mean, I can understand the emotion of this. I mean, Japan abolished the Korean state in 1905, 1910, and Japanese rule through the Second World War was horrific. Uh, so I understand that. But the point is, you got to look at a map. The United States can't really defend South Korea without the cooperation of a country called Japan,
Mhm.
because Japan could block American efforts to reinforce South Korea. So, if you're South Korean, I can understand why people would feel that way. But the point is, unless you want to be overrun by the North Koreans and the Chinese, you have got to come to some accommodation with Japan, because Japan is absolutely essential to the defense of the Republic of Korea. There's no two ways about it.
Mhm.
All you have to do is look at a map.
Mhm.
So my answer is, Yoon was extremely responsible. He went to Camp David
Yeah.
along with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in August of last year. They signed the Spirit of Camp David. This really was, I think, and Biden said, oh, Kishida and Yoon are heroes for doing this. No, Kishida wasn't the hero. It was Yoon, because Yoon took a stand which was really courageous, really brave, and really unpopular. And he had to know that it was really unpopular, but he did it anyway because he realized that you can't defend South Korea unless Japan is helping.
Mhm.
And that's why, the Democratic Party of Korea, Minju, they don't really care because they want to be overrun by North Korea. Well, I don't want to say they want to be overrun, but they see their country as Korea. And they are willing to come to terms. And matter of fact, they're coming to terms on Pyongyang's terms. And that is, so I can understand from their viewpoint, but I mean, if I were South Korean, I wouldn't want to be ruled from Pyongyang or
No.
worse from Beijing. And Moon Jae-in, when he was president, was subservient. He was absolutely subservient to Beijing. This is wrong. If I was a Korean patriot, I'd be furious at Minju.
Yeah.
So it's run by a group of, in their 60s who remember the Gwangju massacre and have not gone beyond that. But the world has changed since then. And if you believe in Korean nationalism, even if you believe in a unified Korea, you have to support the government in Seoul, because that's the only government that is willing to stand up to China. Pyongyang isn't, and certainly Minju isn't.
Mhm. Gordon, you remember when former President Moon, when the North Korean defector escaped North Korea, he sent him right back to North Korea, and I think he was
Must have been
he faced the
executed.
death penalty there. I think he immediately died right after. How come there wasn't enough international outcry regarding that?
It's like there was so much going on at the time elsewhere, I suppose. But the outcry, what Moon Jae-in did was absolutely 100% wrong, a violation of the South Korean constitution, nothing else. But it was just morally wrong. And but that's the way that Minju thinks. And that's the way a new Minju government will govern. And this is something that the United States and the rest of the free world has to understand, that this is the existential crisis of freedom in South Korea.
Hmm. And I think, so what's your thought if let's think about the negative scenario, the negative scenario of President Yoon being impeached. The Constitutional Court, 6 of the judges decides to side with the parliament, and Lee Jae-myung, Lee Jae-myung is a shoo-in to be the next president, I would think. What, how would South Korea look like with Lee Jae-myung as a new president? Would they be full on like, left-wing socialist country? What's your thought?
Well, certainly full on socialist left wing, but as I point out, they want to merge the South Korean state out of existence. They have adopted a very subservient position to China. I mean, they want the South Korean chaebol to give all their trade secrets to China. This is treason.
Do you think they're compromised, the Democratic Party? How much percentage of the Democratic Party, do you think almost 100% by China and North Korea?
I can't speak to motivation, but I can say, if they were compromised, if they were traitors, they would be governing and acting as they have acted. So I don't care about motivation. These are just dangerous people.
If it's proven that Lee Jae-myung was behind sending $8 million to North Korea, isn't that also against international law? And would the United States, under Trump administration, take action against Lee Jae-myung?
I don't know what Trump would do. One of the things that I'm sure that his advisors will say that if he'd take action against Yi, the problem would be that then he'll turn around and break the treaty. So I think that it would be a very difficult 5 years. I mean, it was difficult enough with Moon Jae-in,
Yeah.
And we survived that. But I'm not sure that we can survive another 5 years of Min-ju.
Mm-hmm. I'm recently reading John Bolton's book, The White House Memoir, just to see what was going on, because he did write a lot about the South Korea situation when Trump was meeting Kim Jong-un. Both Trump and Kim Jong-un didn't want Moon Jae-in to be in the meeting. They wanted one-on-one. It seems like they didn't want to do anything with Moon Jae-in, both sides, Trump and also Kim Jong-un. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that I don't know because I wasn't around for the
Mm-hmm.
development of Trump's North Korea policy.
But it doesn't sound like Kim Jong-un was so buddy-buddy with Moon Jae-in as
Oh
we
no,
thought.
I mean the North Korean leaders despise the leftists in South Korea. That's a news flash or to the Min-ju.
I think.
But it's clear when you look at the way the North Korean leaders. I mean, they treated Kim Dae-jung very poorly. Kim Dae-jung gives them $400 million, and what do? They create all these belligerent military provocations against South Korea, and they treat Kim poorly. So yeah, they despise them, but that doesn't prevent the leftists, the progressives in South Korea from trying to come to terms with North Korea.
Do you
They
think
they just never learn.
Do you think former President Kim Dae-jung, was naive to implement the Sunshine Policy and give money to North Korea? Many people were supporting that because we wanted to have some kind of good relationship, harmonious relationship with North Korea. But do you think that in itself was so naive that we can't have a harmonious relationship, in all honesty, with a hostile nation?
The best explanation for Kim Dae-jung is that he was naive. That's the best explanation.
Got it. So do you see China militarily attacking Taiwan in the near future?
This is complicated. I don't think that China would start hostilities by launching an invasion of the main island of Taiwan.
Because scared of Trump?
Yeah, they're scared of Trump, but they also, for a lot of other reasons. And let me just quickly go through them. First of all, war would be, and I think Xi Jinping knows this, war would be extremely unpopular with the Chinese people right now. But a war on Taiwan would be the least popular. And the reason is, although the people in Taiwan view themselves as Taiwanese, not Chinese, people in China, because of indoctrination, view the people in Taiwan as Chinese. And Chinese people say, Chinese do not kill Chinese.
Okay.
So launching an invasion on Taiwan would be extremely unpopular. But there are other reasons. And part of it is to launch an invasion on the main island of Taiwan, it has to be a combined air, land, sea operation. That means Xi Jinping has to give some general or admiral almost complete control over the Chinese military. Xi Jinping doesn't trust his military right now. Military may or may not be loyal to Xi Jinping. Even in the best of times, Xi Jinping wouldn't entrust some flag officer because that would make that flag officer the most powerful individual in China. So this is something that Xi Jinping, he likes to huff and puff about. He talks about it all the time, including in his 2025 New Year's message a week ago. But that's not going to happen.
Okay.
What can happen, though, is Xi Jinping, with his belligerent activities against Taiwan, against other countries, can stumble into war. And once he stumbles into a war, then Taiwan will be involved. So this is sort of like conflict through the back door. Just one other thing, Michael, and that is people in Taiwan think that Xi Jinping might declare a quarantine on Taiwan. Quarantine's not an act of war, but in this volatile situation, it could easily turn into a war. So there are other ways that this will happen. That Xi Jinping will back himself into a conflict with Taiwan.
When you say quarantine Taiwan, it surrounds Taiwan to not have any other relationship with other nations?
Yeah, a quarantine would be, for instance, the China stopping every ship going into Taiwan, trying to stop planes from going into Taiwan without China's permission. That is something which could easily turn into a blockade. Now, a blockade is an act of war, and a blockade could easily turn into conflict. So this is a point where Xi Jinping could easily start a war. And actually, he has some domestic incentives to start a war. But as I said, I don't think he'll start hostilities by launching an invasion on the main island of Taiwan because it requires him to do things which he knows, which he doesn't want to do.
Gordon, how long did you live in mainland China?
We lived there from August 1996 to May 2001.
2000. What was your experience there? So you must have seen some kind of good side of China and also a lot of negative side of China. What's your experience there? And did that experience also implement your point of view about China, which has been pretty largely negative?
Well, when we arrived, it was a very optimistic time in China. And I can remember my wife, Lydia, getting on the phone and saying, Mom, China's not communist anymore.
Oh,
okay. And I agreed with her. But as we lived there, worked there, traveled around the country, saw things, talked to people, we realized that our initial impression was absolutely 100% wrong. China was still very communist, and it was heading in wrong directions. So that changed my view of it. And I saw a China which was very different from the prevailing view at the time.
Well, okay. Do you think communist is dictatorship? You have to have a dictator to implement communist ideology. There's a lot of communists here too in the States, here and there. I mean, not a lot, but I can see some people, but they've been brainwashed, in my opinion, completely. They just think that it's a good thing to share the wealth and all that, but that's not actually happening. If you look at North Korea or China, you see the extreme opposite. The disparity of income is one extreme to another.
Yeah. Well, people, political scientists said that communist China was, after the Maoist years, was not a dictatorship because it was sort of like ruled by committee. And one could say, yeah, there was no dictator in the traditional sense of what a dictator is. But today, under Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping looks very much like a dictator, especially now. Now he looks like a failing dictator. But if you go back pre-COVID, yeah, I think he met the political science definition of a dictator. Mao Zedong was very close to being a dictator in 1949. It was supposed to be a regime run by a committee, which is not dictatorial, but he turned it into a dictatorial regime. Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, they weren't dictators in the traditional sense, or at least Jiang and Hu weren't. I mean, this gets very wonky. Michael Bloomberg stepped into this by saying Xi Jinping wasn't a dictator.
Yeah, that's true.
But Bloomberg was wrong, because when Bloomberg spoke, Xi Jinping actually did exercise dictatorial power over the Chinese regime.
Mhm. The Panama Canal, Trump has raised that that United States should have complete control over the Panama Canal, um, because he suspects that the Chinese government is behind controlling the Panama Canal. What's your thought on that?
Well, China certainly has more influence in the Panama Canal Zone than we do. Maybe even and certainly China can close off the canal. It has port operations at both ends of the canal. It's building the fourth bridge over the canal, which it could easily be used to take it down. Because China's involvement in the canal zone is so extensive, it knows how it can block that critical waterway. So Trump is right to raise the issue.
Hmm. And do you think in 2020 COVID happening from Wuhan lab and Anthony Fauci behind gain of function, sending money, and somehow they put steroids on SARS and became like COVID. So there has been a lot on the right side, Trump supporting side, that has been very suspicious of Chinese governments, the CCP, and the so-called the deep state people in the States. They have collaborated to bring down Trump because Trump was widely very against the global agenda. Do you buy into this? That
Well,
the CCP and the deep state somehow collaborated and to bring down Trump in 2020 because he was a shoo-in. He had like 90% chance to win the re-election until COVID happened.
yeah, I mean, if you go back early 2020, everyone was talking about Trump being a shoo-in for re-election.
Yeah.
I think certain things happen. I don't know if there was a conspiracy between the deep state and China. I don't think so. But we do know a couple things. We know that, for instance, and just do this chronologically, 2014, President Obama declares a moratorium on the federal funding of gain of function research because it was too dangerous. So you had Anthony Fauci then funding gain of function research in a Chinese military weapons lab, which is the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then I think Fauci did his best in the early stages of COVID to cover up his involvement in that, and also to prettify China. He did his best to put China in the best light.
Mm-hmm.
On the escape of COVID from China, this is a disease that should not have left the central part of China,
Yeah.
but Xi Jinping made sure that it did. He deliberately took steps to spread COVID beyond China's borders. He lied about transmissibility. And then while he was locking down his own country, he was trying to pressure other countries, including the US, of taking arrivals from China without travel restrictions or quarantines. And it were those Chinese passengers that took that disease and made it a global pandemic. So, yes, this was deliberate. So 7 million people outside of China who died from COVID, which includes 1.2 million Americans, I believe were murdered.
Yeah, because I remember Trump declared a travel ban against China when Anthony Fauci recommended him not to. So I'm wondering whether Anthony Fauci was working together with CCP to spread this disease all over the place so that you have all sorts of lockdown. Actually, the election fraud that we're talking about happened because of the premise was COVID, and all these swing states changed their election laws without going through the legislature.
Well, there's a lot of things that happened. I'm not sure that it happened according to a plan that was conceived beforehand, but they did happen.
It's just
And
suspicious, it's just odd.
it is odd. But we know that Anthony Fauci was involved in very dangerous activities. We know that he committed perjury twice before the Senate. We know Xi Jinping deliberately spread COVID beyond his borders. You put all those things together, and it ended up with Biden getting elected. So I don't know if it's a deep state plan, but separate actors acting on their own interests ended up with that result.
So, because you and I know, Gordon, about the mainstream media being completely on the side of the deep state, so to speak, the Democratic Party, which when we go back to South Korea, I think the mainstream media there is completely controlled and compromised. But at least here in the States, Gordon, you know that we had other outlets like alternative media, podcast, AM radio, YouTube, at to a certain extent, even though I was suppressed, and also X and all those sorts of other outlets. But in South Korea, it's very limited. Other than YouTube, I don't think you can get other kind of information there.
Yeah, and under Moon Jae-in, they censored everybody, and YouTube was really the main conservative media outlet,
True.
and they went after conservative YouTubers, as Michael they're doing right now. Minju is going after conservative YouTubers.
You tweeted about it. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, Minju is decided it's not only impeaching people, but it's going to use the power of criminal prosecution. So they're going after 4 conservative YouTubers, and they're also going after city councils who are conservative. So this is very, very dangerous. It is an overreach.
Got it. Any last words you want to tell our audience? Also, just I want you to mention about I think it will be Trump, America versus China, pretty much under Trump's second term. China is not doing well economically. Their real estate market has collapsed. And what's your prediction regarding China? What's going to happen between U.S. versus China under Trump?
Yeah, I don't think we have 5 hours.
Yeah, just a short version of.
Yeah, the short version is it's going to be a very troubled relationship going forward because the United States is no longer going to tolerate unacceptable, dangerous, malicious, and malign behavior on the part of China. I don't know how Trump is going to work this out, but there will be increased tension. And because of China's serious situations at home, Xi Jinping will have incentives to lash out. So this will be a critical period.
Okay, thank you very much, Gordon. And hopefully things will resolve well in South Korea because I think it's very critical right now. I think it's hard to imagine Trump dealing with Lee Jae-myung admin or the Democratic Party administration over there. So I'm praying every day.
Well, we pray every day, and thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.